You guys making money on that talk or something?
So far.
Never heard anybody put a plug in like that for something. But anyway, Jerry Weaver, alcoholic. Sobriety date's July the 2nd, 1989. Home group is a group called There Is a Solution. We meet in Holly Springs tonight at 7 o'clock. And I wished I'd have thought about this a little better. I would have told Steve I couldn't have done it tonight because tonight is our business meeting night. And it's always scary to be away from your home group on business meeting night because a lot of times they want to vote stuff in that you don't agree with and you ain't there to talk about it. So hopefully they won't do that to me tonight. But anyway, we're a good group of Alcoholics Anonymous. Come check us out. Some of y'all have been there. I also have a sponsor and have found that a home group and a sponsor are two things that I've always been active in since I got sober. And they're two things that have served me very, very well. Being involved and being active in both of those things. So good to be here tonight. Good to be sober. Good to see a good crowd here. I've been sober since my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I don't tell you that to impress you or to tell you that you did something wrong if you haven't been sober since your first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. The reason I say that is because I was sober about 9 months. And I had taken all the steps and was trying to live the AA way of life, and my life started to change. And I started to, some good things started to happen, even as screwed up as my life was at the time. And I remember the first time a guy that kind of tried to help me when I first got sober, he had relapsed. And I was kind of devastated that the guy relapsed. I didn't even at the time was so naive, didn't realize that people in Alcoholics Anonymous went back to drinking once they got sober. I didn't really know it was an option, which is probably a good thing for me. And then I would go to some of these open discussion meetings and I'd hear people talking about their problems and all this bad stuff that was happening to them, and they were, oh, woe is me. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, I'm feeling pretty, even as screwed up as my life was, I was feeling pretty good about my situation compared to the way it was 9 months prior to that. And I went to this one meeting and this guy says that relapse was a requirement and that he was glad that he relapsed and that it really had enhanced his sobriety. And so I'm sitting, I'm getting to a point here in a second, don't worry. And so anyway, I'm starting to wonder if I needed to like relapse. And then I start buying into some of this nonsense you hear in Alcoholics Anonymous. I started wondering if maybe I wasn't, digging deep enough inside to find all these problems and all this stuff. I'm wondering if I did something wrong. And I was in a meeting one night in Dunn, North Carolina, at the AA Club. And it was a speaker meeting night on Sunday night. And this guy walked into the door that was, I would later come to realize that he was the speaker. But when he walked in the door, the room lit up. And this guy was full of energy and full of laughter. His eyes glittered, and he got up and started giving this talk. And he said, one of the first things he said was that his sobriety date was Groundhog Day 1957. And he said that he had been sober since his first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that what he found in Alcoholics Anonymous was permanent. And that he didn't find some kind of first aid kit for Alcoholics Anonymous, for alcoholism, that he found a very deep spiritual program that basically transformed his life. And he was just full of energy and full of enthusiasm. And I'd never heard anything like that before. 9 months sober, I'd never heard anybody give a talk like that. There was nothing negative or there was no self-pity in that talk. It was Tom Ivester. And it changed my life that night. And he put the words things that I was feeling. And I had never heard anything like that, but I walked away from there knowing that Alcoholics Anonymous is way more than just something that we go to. That Alcoholics Anonymous is a way of life that basically will transform you if you take the actions and do what the program asks you to do. And that's been my experience ever since that moment, is that AA has done way more than just help me get sober. Alcoholics Anonymous has given me a brand new way of life. Alcoholics Anonymous has inspired me to do things way beyond anything I'm capable of doing. Alcoholics Anonymous has given me a purpose to where I know that life's not about me, and that Alcoholics Anonymous is not a selfish program. That my job, once I got better, my job is to help other people. And then my job is to try to set a good example for what God and the program can do in a person's life. So I'm grateful for Tom to carry that message that night. And it was one of those moments. It was one of those moments in your life where it just shifted my life. And you know, I've had that happen a few other times where my sponsor would say something that would just change the whole direction of my life. And anyway, I know that it'd be good to have him here tonight. Maybe we'll see him this weekend. And Wallace, it's always good to see Wallace. He's one of my heroes, and lots of other people in the room. Not my heroes, but friends. But I love Wallace Bryant. So I took my first drink when I was 12 years old in the basement of a house up in Northern Virginia, and my life changed from that point on. Actually, that was not my first drink. I'm like a lot of other people. If I start talking too quick, a couple lies will come out. I can remember being young, 6, 7 years old, and be at my grandparents' house and taking sips of beer from my uncle or from my grandfather, and not really thinking much about it. So I was a social drinker up to the age of 12. I went into full-blown alcoholism in the basement of that guy's house. But that night we were just kind of bored, and we decided we were going to drink some whiskey. So we got some old Granddad 100 proof, and I can remember that night just like it's right now. Well, I got that stuff down, and it didn't take but a few minutes. It transformed my life. All that fear and all that doubt and all that insecurity that I had about my life and about myself and about the world just kind of disappeared. And it made me have different thoughts about myself. I was stronger and smarter and better looking. And all those people that I was afraid of, I wasn't afraid of them anymore. And all those things that I was questioning, I wasn't questioning anything because I had all the answers to everything. And it basically made me feel like I was the king of the world. Lit me up like a firecracker. Woke up the next morning, couldn't quite remember everything that happened later on in the evening because I blacked out. Woke up in a pile of vomit, sick as a dog. First thing that came out, first thought in my mind was, my God, I got to do that again just as quick as I can. And I mean, there was no thought that I'm not going to do that again. I mean, it basically just, I mean, I had a spiritual experience. And a day later or 2 days later, I don't exactly remember, but I went right back in the basement of that guy's house and drank some more of that whiskey. And the same thing happened. All that, it made me, it took the edge off and just made me feel like I was completely different. And I'm a guy that had a lot of good times drinking. I love drinking. I loved everything about drinking. And as a kid, I loved sneaking around. I loved stealing it. I loved stealing it from other kids' parents and hiding out in the woods. And I enjoyed going to parties. I discovered strobe lights and heavy metal music. At about the same time I started drinking. Discovered girls not long after that because alcohol gave me enough courage to actually make a move on one. And I loved getting into trouble. I loved riding the roads and the police chasing us. I loved running from the law. I loved getting into trouble. I loved getting into fights. I just loved everything about the whole scene that was caused by alcohol. And you'll hear people say that their best day, their worst day sober is better than their best day drinking or something like that. Well, that ain't true for me. My God, I had a lot of good times sober. Drinking. I had a bunch of good times drinking that were probably better than the day I had today. I enjoyed it, and I don't think as a kid I was suffering from any kind of disease or anything like that. I was just a guy that I just enjoyed what alcohol did for me. And I got into a bunch of trouble, and that's how I got into the military. I went to the Air Force, and I'd gotten into a bunch of trouble in Harnett County, and they told me if you go in the military, we might let you off, and that's what I did. And I can remember at that point having all these ideas that I'm going to get into the military and get some discipline and some education and going to learn how to be responsible, and I mean that didn't happen. Around that time is when I guess I crossed over, and I just absolutely couldn't control how much I drank. And I couldn't predict what was going to happen when I started drinking. And I started blacking out a lot. I'd wake up in places and not remember how I got there. I'd wake up with other people's clothes on and wondering what happened the night before. I woke up one morning with some girls' clothes on and living in the dorm with 200 guys. Now, that's not good if waking up with around 200 guys dressed up like the girl. I mean, that's just... That's one of them times you're glad you blacked out, because you don't want to know what happened. And but things like that would happen, and I'd wake up. The next day I wouldn't think much about it. I just thought everybody kind of blacked out and didn't remember what they did. I know now that doesn't happen to a whole lot of people. And I got married young, thinking that was going to teach me some responsibility and help me to do the right thing. And basically what happened was I was a bad husband. I was mentally, physically, and verbally abusive to my wife. Now, I have to say this, she was mentally, physically, and verbally abusive to me as well. And she could give it just as good as she could take it. So sometimes she'd win, sometimes I'd win. I mean, it was like it was not an uneven fight. But we just had a chaotic marriage. I mean, it was just one chaotic episode after another, one breakup and get back together, break up, get back together. I was a terrible member of the Air Force. I worked on airplanes, intoxicated many times. And we'd go out for lunch, get drunk, and we'd come back and work on airplanes. And we never even really thought about people who actually flew on them. And that was just a kind of a vicious cycle. And I was just extremely dishonest and selfish with my family, and I wanted my family to do everything I wanted them to do, and I'd make them feel sorry for me, and when the book says the root of our trouble is selfishness and self-centeredness, that's absolutely true. I was sober several years before I fully understood that, but I'm a guy that thinks everybody should do what I want them to do. I'm a guy that thinks that things should go exactly the way that I want them to go, and then when they don't, I basically, I'll either write you off or I'll, make you feel sorry for me to get what I want. And I played that with everybody that I was around. And basically what happened to me was one morning I had some family members that started talking to me about my drinking and kind of the way that I was living, and I never really gave it much thought. I just thought that everything was okay, and that if things got really bad, I could quit on my own. One morning I had convinced these two guys to drive to Oxon Hill, Maryland with me to go rob a guy. And we were in Coates. It's about 320 miles to where this guy we were going to so-called rob. And we could have drove just a few miles down the road and robbed somebody and probably got more. And I had saved a 300-mile trip. But anyway, we left Coates and we got to about Benson, which was about 8 miles down the road, and I started hearing these voices, and they were like real, and it was telling me that I needed to get my life in order, and I needed to get some help. And I remember I pulled off to a convenience store there in downtown Benson, and I got on the payphone, and I called my younger brother and told him that he had told me that him and the people in his church were praying for me, that if I ever needed any help to give him a call. So I gave him a call, and I told him, I was like, man, I think I need some help. And he said that he said, I've been expecting a phone call. He said, come on over and we'll take care of you. And I ditched those two guys, and that morning went over to his house, and he was actually at my mom's house, and I talked to him that morning. It was January the 1st, 1989. It was a Sunday morning. It was New Year's Day. It's a great day to get your life in order, make a few New Year's resolutions and switch things around, man, just, get off to a good start. And I went to church with him that morning, and I rolled up in the church with him. I had these pants on that were about 4 inches too short, and had this old silk shirt on with a big old collar, one of those old disco shirts. And I looked like Pee Wee Herman coming up into church that morning. And people were looking at me, and man, I don't know what they were thinking, but that morning they had the altar call, and it was it was. I went up and people started praying on me, and I got up there and cried in front of everybody, and told them I wanted to get my life in order. And you know, that morning, I wanted to get better. Yeah, in AA terms, I mean, I had a desire to stop what I was doing, and I had a desire to get my life in order. I mean, probably just as strong, if not stronger, than the day I actually got sober. But I left that church that morning, and I thought that my life was just automatically going to get better because of just going up there one day and praying with people. Now, they didn't tell me that. That was the delusion in my mind. 3 days later, I was drinking. For the next couple of months, I would stay active in that church, going in there drunk, going in there hungover, and I'd go into the bathroom and do cocaine while the guy was preaching. Now, I don't recommend that. It's one of them hellfire brimstone churches, and you know, the guy would get up there and preach, and he would just be laying it on them, and I'd be thinking, like, man, that guy's following me around. How's he know I've been doing all that stuff? You know, and then you'd go out to the parking lot and take a drink, go into the bathroom, and then come back in there all torqued up, and you're already just paranoid as heck, man. And next thing you know, I'm like expecting the devil to pop up out of the ground and just snatch me down. And I would leave and be full of guilt, full of remorse about the way I was living, and I'd just at this point I'd make up all kinds of lies, and I would leave the house with the intent of like going to the store and coming home, and I'd be sober, and somewhere between the house and the store, my mind would like shift, and the next thing you know, I'm buying some beer, or I'm going over to Robbie's house, and I'm gone for 3 or 4 days, and you know, I don't know what's wrong with me. I had all intentions of going to the store and coming back. And once I took that first drink, I couldn't predict what was going to happen, and I'd be off to the races. And I hated what I was doing to my family. I hated the way that I was living. And the world just got real dark, and I got really, I guess, what we would call depressed, and was full of anxiety. And I know now all that was alcoholism for me, but I attempted suicide, and I had the second suicide attempt. I tried to stop telling this story, but people want me to tell this story, so I'm going to tell it. I had this dog that had mange, and the dog was ate up with the red mange. I mean, he looked just terrible. And the vet had given us this poison to kill the mange on that dog, and I had this bright idea that if it killed mange, maybe it would kill a human. And so one night I pulled some of it up to a syringe and shot it up my arm. And I laid down on it's funny now, man, it wasn't funny at the time, but I tell you, I laid down on the kitchen floor of the house there, and I won't go into all that, but I went away from here for a little while, and I ain't trying to be dramatic. I mean, there was nothing dramatic about it. I did it just as easy as I'd go back and get a cup of coffee. I mean, there was no thought put into it that maybe it's not a good idea, maybe there's another way, or maybe you should call somebody. I just wanted to check out. And that led to being admitted to the hospital for 5 days under my younger brother's name. My family was trying to hide it. I was still in the Air Force at this time, and my family was trying to hide it from the Air Force. So they checked me into a civilian hospital up in Raleigh under my brother's name, which that's a whole nother story. But I got out of the hospital 5 days later and knew I would never drink again, knew I would never go back to living that way. And about 3 days out of the hospital, I started drinking again. And I had those thoughts that, man, if you just buy an 8-ounce beer, we used to call those the ponies. If you buy a pony instead of a tall boy, it'll be different. It'll be okay. You know, nobody gets drunk on 8-ounce beer. So I pulled into the Quick Stop there in Anderson Creek and bought me a Slim Jim and an 8-pack of ponies, Budweisers, and I was off to the races. And what had happened 8 days before that, of committing suicide and drinking after I was promising people that I wasn't going to be drinking, and the trauma that it caused me and my family. I mean, it was traumatic on my family, and it devastated them. They didn't know what to do. They were baffled. I mean, they lied and broke the law and risked their own livelihood to check me into a hospital. And the thoughts of that don't come into my mind with sufficient amount of force to stop me from taking that first drink. That I'll just lay all that stuff aside for some crazy, insane thought that, hey, if you drink a pony instead of a tall boy, it's going to be okay. And it's going to really be okay if you eat that Slim Jim first and coat your stomach. And then, right, you ain't nothing to worry about. That's alcoholism. That's that mental obsession that there's no human power that can relieve me of that. That the only thing that can help me with that is the power of God. And so anyway, yeah, I was off to the races again. Now, the good news about all that is I've never had the mange. And now I will submit to you that I also, this is just a theory, but I think that poison has helped my hair grow as I've aged. Most people, when they get old, their hair kind of falls out. Not everybody, but mine just like keeps on growing like there's fertilizer in it or something. And I'm thinking it's that mange poison. Now I don't recommend you go try it, but those folks that invented Rogaine and all that stuff, I think they need to check into that mange. But anyway, I didn't know what was wrong with me. I became hopeless, just like a lot of us, and I really thought that there was no place for me on the earth, and that my life was never going to amount to anything. And I'm making promises and breaking promises. I'm even writing notes and to my wife and writing out promises of what I'm going to do. And the next day, I'm already breaking them. And I tried shaving my head around that time, thinking that was going to keep me sober. No, that's a bright man right there that thinks shaving his head is going to keep him sober. But that's what I did. I shaved my head, and I stayed sober for about 3 days. I figured out I can stay sober for 3 days on just about doing anything. But yeah, shaved head won't keep you sober long. And I'd read books and listen to gospel music, and I was just in full fight from reality. And basically what happened was I got discharged out of the Air Force, and I was honorably discharged out of the Air Force somehow, although I was under investigation by the OSI for some other stuff, but I got out of that, and I'm basically living like an animal. My wife's gone. We're getting ready to lose our house. The old Volkswagen, 72 Volkswagen Beetle I had, the motor blowed up in that. I'm just kind of walking around, and I left the guy's house one morning in Benson and was going to go to the IGA and write a bad check and go by the bootleggers. And that morning when I left that guy's house, I had no intentions of getting sober. I had no intentions of getting my life in order. By this time, everybody I'd blame my life on, they were leaving me alone. And there was nobody after me. There was nobody coming to check on me or running me down or trying to get me to do something I didn't want to do. And I just kind of resigned to the fact that my life was just going to go into some miserable end. I was going to probably die soon, and I was fine with that. It was okay. And anyway, when I was walking down Old Fairground Road there, and it was like my whole life flashed before my eyes, and it was not unlike what had happened 6 months before that when I started hearing those voices. But I started hearing voices again. It was telling me, man, you need to get your life in order. You just turned 22 years old. Life should be starting. It shouldn't be ending. And it's like I wanted to die, I didn't want to die. And I just had this big, like this kind of moment of clarity that if I didn't do something, that I wasn't going to make it. And I said, I can remember that morning just like it's right now. I said, I said out loud, there's got to be something better than this. And then I said, God, please help me. And what I can tell you is I've been sober ever since that moment. Now, I didn't just get struck sober and everything's been foot massages and Fruity Pebbles since then, but I've been sober ever since that moment, and I believe I've continued to grow spiritually and get better since that moment. And that what happened was that I ended up in a detox that morning. I had no knowledge of Alcoholics Anonymous. I had no knowledge of alcoholism, 12 steps. I didn't know what was wrong with me. I had no clue what was wrong with me. All I knew was I drank too much, and that I could never do anything that I set out to do. I always had a lot of good intentions, but never could act out on that. And basically what happened was I was introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous through the detox. A guy from Alcoholics Anonymous came in and talked to me, and he basically did a 12-step call on me. I'd never heard anything like that before in my life, but there was an immediate identification that I got with that man that I didn't get from all those other people that tried to help me. Because he basically had been right where I'd been, and yet he was different, and that he claimed that he had recovered and that his life had changed because of AA, and I didn't have really a clue about what that was, but the guy gave me hope. And then I was introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous and to our literature and to the steps. And, one of the things that I always asked myself my whole life was, what the heck's wrong with me? And I found out in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I found out that I was powerless over alcohol and that my life was unmanageable. And that when it was explained to me that that I'm powerless over alcohol because I got a body that when I start drinking, I can't stop. That I understand that I'm bodily different than most other drinkers. That once I start drinking, I can't predict how much I'm going to drink, and I can't predict what I'm going to do. And the book calls that a craving or an allergy. And that certainly was my experience. When that was described to me, I'm not one of those guys that, I don't know if that's me or not. I'm not sure. I knew immediately that what that doctor's opinion told me was that it was absolutely 100% accurate for me. That I've got that allergy. And that's why I'm alcoholic. It's not because my mom loved my little brother more than she loved me. It's not because the Harnett County deputy continued to accuse me of stuff that I didn't do, even though I did all of it. It wasn't because my dad moved me around a lot as a kid and I had low self-esteem, and it wasn't because of the lady that I married. And if you'd asked me what my problem was, I would have told you that it was all their fault, and that's why I did the things I did. That's why I drank the way that I drank. But they had nothing to do with it. That I was alcoholic because I got alcoholism, and that means once I start drinking, I can't stop. The sad part about all that is that I also have a mind that tells me it's okay to do it. And basically what that means is that I've lost the power of choice in drinking, that I can't bring into my mind with sufficient amount of force the pain and suffering that happens from taking a drink to stop me from taking it. And I had that experience many, many, many times. I mean, I had that experience when I got out of the hospital on that suicide attempt, thinking that I could drink some beer that it would be okay. That's that mental obsession. And, I was told that the only way to recover from that is a spiritual experience through taking the 12 steps. And it doesn't matter how much my mom loves me, doesn't matter how much my wife threatens me, or how many times the first sergeant gives me an ultimatum, that I'm going to drink, that I'm going to have to find a power greater than myself to help me stay sober. And I think one of the greatest things that happened to me was that when in the second step was that I was told that I could believe whatever I wanted to believe. That was much different than a few of those churches I had tried to get sober in. They had a definite thing that you had to believe in if you were going to be a member there. And if you didn't believe in that, then they didn't want to have a whole lot to do with you. And when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I was told, hey, you can believe whatever you want to believe. Matter of fact, you just got to be willing to believe that there's something greater than you. And that opened the door up for me. And what happened to me was that at just a few days sober, a guy helped me walk through my life and helped me find all the times where I should have gone to prison and I didn't. All the times where I got in car accidents and should have died and didn't. All the other crazy, chaotic things that I did drunk, and I basically had gotten through all that stuff pretty much unharmed. And by all rights, I shouldn't have been sitting there. And he asked me, he said, so do you think you had anything to do with getting through all that stuff? And I had to concede, no, I probably didn't. If it was up to me, I'd have been dead or in prison. And he said, well, do you believe that maybe something helped you get through that stuff for a reason? And I was like, I had to concede that. I said, well, yeah, maybe there was something that helped me get through that. And he said, well, whatever got you through that crazy, chaotic life sober, maybe that will help you stay sober. Or drunk, maybe that same power will help you stay sober. And that's what I did. The second step was I just believed that whatever helped me through that crazy, chaotic life, drinking might help me stay sober. And that I was taught not to put in that early on, you don't need to put a label or a name on it. You don't even have to understand it. Just believe that there's something that can help you. And that kind of came to life to me through going to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous and hearing people's stories. The first AA meeting I went to, there was a guy there that I had drank with. And man, that dude was way worse drunk than I was. Matter of fact, when I wanted to feel good about myself, I'd hang out with him. And I walked into the meeting and he was there and I was like, man, I can't believe that guy's in here. And he came up and his eyes were all glittered up, and he was on fire, and he was sober, and he'd been sober for about 6 months. And it floored me. And I'm like, man, if Marshall can stay sober, any daggone body can stay sober. And it gave me hope that Alcoholics Anonymous would work. And I would hear people's stories. And I'm a guy that was raised to be a skeptic. And you don't believe anything that you hear. And even if somebody's telling you the truth, there's still some kind of hidden agenda there. And for some reason, when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, for people in AA, that left me. That I believed what people here were telling me was the truth. And I don't know how to describe that. But I would hear those AA stories and hear the miracles that happened in people's lives, and it gave me hope. And that's kind of how that second step moved in my life, was that I was through other people. And pretty quickly when I got sober, I started finding out when I took different actions and tried to be honest and stop working angles and games with people, that I got different results. And that's just the power that I turned my life over to in the third step. At about 3 weeks sober, I just believed that power would help me, and I was told that my will was my thinking and that my life was my actions. And I didn't have a whole lot of control over my thinking, because my thinking was crazy. And it was like a roller coaster. But I could control my actions. And I was taught that kind of the concepts of the third step early on is just to try to do the right thing. If you don't know what to do, don't do anything. And call somebody and talk to them before you take any crazy actions. And try to stay away from all that craziness in your mind. That worked well for me. And it really showed up for me early on by coming to meetings early and helping to set up and getting involved in the program and staying late and cleaning up, going out to coffee or out to eat after the meeting, even though I didn't want to. I was scared to death of people, but I did it because I didn't want to go back to drinking. And that was all kind of the third step shown in my life, because I was taking actions that were contrary to what I would normally do. I never helped anybody out. I never got anywhere early. I was always late, or I wouldn't show up. I'd tell you I'd be there and then not show up. And I started doing a lot of things different when it came to Alcoholics Anonymous and the AA meetings. And I did a 4-step, wrote that 4-step out, and wrote out some resentments and fears and some crazy behavior. And I shared that stuff with a guy at about 5 weeks sober. And my life changed. When I wrote that stuff out and shared it with the guy, and I saw that my life was just one big lie. And that the way that I saw things and perceived things were just absolutely, completely false and wrong. And all the people that I had thought had wronged me, and all the people I thought that were against me, and all the people that I had formed all these stories in my mind about what I thought people had done and what they were doing, And I realized when I shared that stuff that it was just a bunch of nonsense in my mind, that most of the people that I thought had harmed me had done nothing but try to help me. And that most of them, all they wanted was what was best for me. And I started realizing that I'm the one that had wronged them, that I was the one that took crazy actions or didn't do stuff when I should have done it. And that I was an extremely selfish and self-centered guy that was just full of dishonesty. I had told so many lies and was so dishonest, I started believing all that stuff was true. That's why the book uses the term delusion. It doesn't use denial is when you know the truth and you basically deny it or lie about it. Delusion, you don't know the truth from the false. And yeah, I actually believed all that crap that was up in my head. And when I shared all that stuff with a guy and was done with it, I mean, I started to become free of my past. And probably most importantly was I took responsibility for my own actions for the very first time. And my life started to change. And what happened was early on with step 6 and 7, I just kind of breezed over them real quick. Like, yeah, I want to change, and I think God's going to help me. And I went on and started making amends. I would learn several years later that 6 and 7 were a little more than just that. I underestimated how powerful some of those character defects were. But I started making amends to people at 7, 8 weeks sober. And I was taught that if you're going to stay sober and if you want to get your life in order, that these are the things that you do. And I was never taught, work a step a year, or you ain't been sober long enough to do this, and some of that stuff you hear in Alcoholics Anonymous. I was taught to take actions. And that if I took actions, simple actions, that my life would change. And that's what happened to me was when I started approaching people and making amends and made arrangements for people that I owed money to and went back and made good on bad checks, my life started to change. And that fear that I had of life and the fear that I had of people and the fear that I had of God started to disappear. Because I was living different. And because I started looking at the world differently. And I started helping other people. I started sponsoring people. I started going into the prison. I started going into a prison at 3 months sober. Nowadays, they won't let you do that. But I started volunteering at Harnett Correctional when I was about 3 months sober. And I was taught that I had to pass on what had been freely given to me if I was going to stay sober and have a good life. And I've been doing that type of work ever since. And I've been sponsoring people ever since. Because I was taught that my sobriety was not mine, that it's meant to be given away. And that the only way that I can keep it is by passing it on to others. And, what happened was Alcoholics Anonymous gave me purpose. And I realized that. I'm a guy that realized that early on in sobriety, that, all my life I was wondering what life was all about, why am I here? And the answer to that before I came into AA was I was just here to basically die a miserable death. And when I got here, I realized real quick that this is just what I believe, that God kept me sober, kept me alive during that crazy, chaotic life because there was work to be done. And that I believe that God got me sober because He wanted me to serve and to try to help other alcoholics to get sober. And, most people in society live all their whole life and never find out what the true purpose is. Well, I found it in AA. I don't wake up in the morning wondering what I'm supposed to do today. I know what I'm supposed to do. I wake up in the morning and I ask God to help me. I ask God to direct my thinking, and I go about and try to help other people. And now that can be exhausting if you take on a life of service, but it sure beats walking the streets with not knowing what's going to happen and thinking about suicide all the time. And I'm a guy that's overpaid in every area of my life since I've been sober. I'm like everybody else. I had this idea that when I got sober that you quit drinking and everything's just going to get marvelous. Well, actually, you quit drinking and you really are introduced to life and to problems then. And that I've had all kinds of stuff happen since I've been sober. I'm fortunate because I've been sober for way over half of my life. I've been able to grow up in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I consider that an absolute honor and a privilege. Everything. I mean, prior to getting here, I was a loser. I hadn't accomplished anything in my life. I failed at everything I ever tried to do. And because of Men in Alcoholics Anonymous and because of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I've been able to grow up in AA. And I've been able to use the AA steps and the traditions and the concepts and the teachings of Alcoholics Anonymous to guide all my decisions with a career and with a family and with a marriage. And it's never failed me. It's never failed me. And I've been through a divorce sober. I've gotten remarried sober. I've been remarried now for about 22 years. I've had an incredible business career sober because of Alcoholics Anonymous. All that stuff is because of AA. I'm well respected in my family. I'm a leader in my family now, which is sometimes a pain in the butt, but it's also an honor and privilege to be a leader in your family. And you know, what time we got here? I'll share just a story with you. I don't know what story it is, but it'll come to me here in a second. But I was sober about 7 years, and I realized I had done a pretty poor job at making amends to my mother. And when I first got sober, I made an amends to her, but it was more of those, hey, I'm sorry, forgive me. And of course, she's like, okay, son, just glad you're sober, everything's going to be okay. And I realized that she deserved more than that after I was sober about 7 years. And I asked her out for lunch, and I took her out to lunch, and I basically said, hey, I know that I was probably a little difficult raising, and probably was a little, I know that there's some things that I did to you, when I was drinking and acting all crazy, and I just wanted to, let you know that I regret doing some of those things. And I asked her if she, I knew at the time that I had never really given her an opportunity to say anything to me, and I asked her if she had anything she wanted to say, and she'd been waiting for that, and she went on to tell me some stuff about how she felt about some of the times when the deputy came to the high school and took me out in handcuffs for things that I'd done. She had to go get me out of jail. And times when she'd get phone calls about me being hurt and rolling cars and getting into trouble, and how she felt about that. And she told me about this one time I was in a blackout, and it basically kind of beat her up uptown in front of people. I didn't even know I'd done it. And she wasn't doing it cruel. She was just kind of matter of fact just telling me how she felt about it, and the kind of the trauma that it caused to her. And I'm sitting there listening to this, and I'm like, man, I didn't. You never really realize sometimes. A good friend of mine, he's dead now, Don Pritz. He used to say that he said, you know what you did to people, but you don't know what it did to them. And I realized that afternoon talking to my mom, and I'm sitting there thinking, I'm like, well, how do you make amends for this stuff? And she got done, and I asked her, I said, well, what can I do to make it right? I regret the way that I've treated you. And she looked at me and she said, the way you've been living the last 7 years is amends enough. She said, I just want you to keep going to Alcoholics Anonymous and staying sober and helping people. And it kind of floored me, and so now I got to stay sober and go to AA and help people because it's an amends back to my mom. So I don't have a choice in that. But I tell that story because here's what happened, and here's what I saw was that Alcoholics Anonymous is not about me, and that many times we'll talk in meetings about me and my recovery and me, and we will talk about we making amends to take care of us, and that's not been my experience. Is that my membership in Alcoholics Anonymous has not only helped me to be free, but it's helped other people to be free. And that because I'm a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, my mom's not worried about me coming home tonight. Or my mom's not worried about getting a phone call that I've done something crazy. And I realize that the amends and many, many times is for the other person. And that because of Alcoholics Anonymous, she's become free. And that ain't a bad deal. If it was all over right now, I've been overpaid and I've gotten way more than I ever deserved in life because of Alcoholics Anonymous. And when I got here, I was just hoping to get a car and maybe get a little job and just kind of live some kind of crazy, little miserable life. And I've been given way more than that. I've been given the keys to the kings to the kingdom. So thank you.